My name is Serena. I'm 38 years old, and last Christmas I discovered that the people I gave everything to had been rewriting my story for 15 years. For all that time I sent my parents $2,000 every single month. Never late, never skipped, adding up to $360,000. Then on Christmas Eve I overheard my mother telling my aunt that I had never helped them at all, that I owed them for raising me, and that my younger brother Marcus was the one supporting them. Marcus, the son they fully paid through college for, while telling me they could only afford one child's education because he's the boy. Marcus, who hadn't worked steadily in years, yet was taking credit for every dollar I sent. I didn't yell or confront anyone. I quietly made one phone call, and by New Year's Eve, more than 30 relatives knew exactly who had truly been supporting my parents. That's when everything started to change. 15 years earlier, I was 23 and had just received my first real paycheck, still buried under $60,000 in student loans after working multiple jobs through college with zero help from my parents. I remembered being 18 at our kitchen table holding my university acceptance letter asking for help with tuition, only to be cut off and told they could afford just one child, and Marcus needed it more. My mother simply told me I'd figure it out. So I did. Loans, late-night shifts, tutoring, and endless exhaustion got me through school, while Marcus had a smooth path paid for. When I landed my first job in Chicago, instead of celebrating, I sent my parents money. When my mother said it wasn't enough, I sent more. Promotions came and so did higher transfers, but gratitude never did. I kept giving because I believed that's what a good daughter was supposed to do. Looking back, the signs were always there. Being told to go to the library instead of buying books while Marcus got expensive gifts, winning scholarships my parents never showed up to see, and overhearing relatives joke about how girls weren't worth investing in. At 38, when I finally added up the numbers, I realized it wasn't just money I lost. It was years of being erased, overlooked, and used. And that realization became the moment I stopped letting them decide my worth. One night, unable to sleep, I did the math I had avoided for years. $2,000 a month, every month for 15 years. The total, $360,000, hit me all at once, and it felt unreal. That was more than the college help I was denied, more than my brother Marcus had earned as an adult, and more than many homes cost. I lay awake until morning wondering if my parents had ever added it up themselves or thought about where that money came from, and then another question surfaced that shook me even more. What were they telling people about me? I got my answer at Thanksgiving when I arrived late and overheard relatives praising Marcus for supporting our parents, while my mother loudly described me as too busy and uncaring to help. Standing there with grocery bags digging into my hands, I realized they had been taking my money for years while publicly erasing me. My husband Daniel pulled me outside, admitted he'd sensed something was wrong, and reminded me that facts mattered more than arguments. That night and many after, I couldn't sleep, listing everything I was losing by staying silent. Tens of thousands a year, future plans, and my reputation with our entire family. When Daniel pointed out that my accountant had records of every transfer, something finally shifted. I knew speaking up would mean losing my parents for good, but Daniel said what I already knew deep down. I'd lost them long ago, I just hadn't faced it yet. I realized I had been grieving parents I never truly had, always chasing approval that was never coming and giving money in hopes of earning love that was never offered. I told myself I would wait a little longer, give it one last chance, one final sign, even though Christmas was only 2 weeks away. When we arrived on Christmas Eve, my parents' house looked warm and festive from the outside, but inside it felt cold and familiar in the worst way. My mother greeted me without warmth. Relatives filled the room, and Marcus sat at the center soaking up praise while everyone spoke about his so-called plans and responsibility. Comments about how busy I was and how family should come first followed me around the room until I escaped to the kitchen, where I overheard my mother clearly telling my aunt that I had never helped them at all and that Marcus was the one supporting them. Hearing her say it so casually, with years of lies behind it, finally erased any doubt I had left. I didn't confront anyone, didn't raise my voice, and didn't break down. Instead, I quietly stepped outside, pulled out my phone, and called my accountant, knowing in that moment that hope was over and truth was the only thing left to hold on to. That I told Margaret I needed official records for every single transfer I had ever sent to my parents, all 15 years, and after a long pause she asked why. So I calmly explained that my family was telling everyone I had never helped them and was giving my brother credit for all the support. She agreed to prepare certified bank statements, fully verified and signed, and promised to rush them before New Year's because I wanted proof so solid no one could challenge it. After the call, I stood outside listening to laughter and music from inside the house, knowing everything was about to change. 2 days later, while sitting alone in my apartment, I called my estate lawyer and removed my parents from my will and insurance entirely, redirecting everything to a charity that helps students who can't afford college, which felt painfully fitting. By December 30th, an email arrived with a detailed, notarized document showing every transfer month by month, spanning 15 years and totaling $360,000, clearly certified and impossible to deny. As the printer released page after page, the weight of every sacrifice became visible, real, and undeniable, and when Daniel saw the stack, we both understood this wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was the truth, finally ready to be seen. I realized as I stacked the papers and locked them into my briefcase that this was everything I had given up over the years. Every dollar they claimed never existed, and I was done letting that lie stand. When Daniel dropped me off at my parents' house on New Year's Eve, the place was packed, loud, and glowing with celebration, and I walked in alone knowing exactly why I was there. Inside, relatives filled every corner, music was playing, and my parents were soaking up attention while praising my brother as their hero, the one who supposedly supported them through hard times. I sat quietly watching as my father raised a glass and thanked Marcus for helping them every single month, while my mother painted herself as a struggling parent abandoned by a busy, uncaring daughter. When someone mentioned my name, she quickly brushed me off as distant and selfish, and my father added that I never helped at all, drawing sympathy from the room. I looked around at familiar faces nodding along, felt the weight of the briefcase at my feet, and understood that for 15 years I had been erased right in front of them, but not for much longer, because this time I wasn't leaving quietly. I tightened my grip on the briefcase as Aunt Ruth looked straight at me and asked why, with my good job, I never helped my parents, and suddenly every eye in the room was waiting for my answer. I stood up calmly, thanked her for asking, and placed the briefcase on the coffee table, the click of the lock sounding far louder than it should have. Without responding to my mother's sharp warning, I pulled out a thick stack of papers and told everyone it was time they saw the truth. The top page showed clear bank records with my name sending money to my parents, month after month, starting in 2011. Gasps filled the room as relatives picked up the pages, realizing the amounts were $2,000 almost every month for 15 years, totaling $360,000, all officially certified and stamped. Faces shifted from confusion to shock as the papers passed around. Calculators came out and the math became undeniable. When my father tried to dismiss it as a private matter, I calmly reminded him that he had just told everyone I never helped and that my brother carried the family, so the truth deserved to be public too. As whispers spread and my parents struggled to explain themselves, it became clear their story was falling apart, and for the first time, the room was finally seeing who had really been supporting them all along. Cousin Beth broke the tension by asking where Marcus's bank records were, and the room instantly turned toward him as he stood stiff and red-faced, unable to answer. When he admitted he had no proof, the mood shifted fast, with Aunt Ruth pressing harder and Dad trying to shut everything down by calling it a private matter, even though he had just praised Marcus publicly moments earlier. Mom switched tactics, playing hurt and asking why I would embarrass them, but I calmly laid out the truth. They refused to help with my education, favored Marcus openly, and I took on heavy loans while still sending them money every single month for 15 years. I made it clear this wasn't about shame, it was about honesty, and the room fell silent as relatives finally connected the dots. When asked directly, Marcus could barely admit that he had known all along and had never really contributed anything, and that silence said more than words ever could. The party energy disappeared, conversations stopped, and it became clear that years of false praise and quiet lies had finally caught up with them. As the clock passed 10, I stood tall and announced that starting January the money would stop, not out of spite, but because I no longer owed anyone explanations, sacrifice, or silence. Mom let out a quiet sob as I calmly continued, explaining that I had removed both of my parents from my life insurance and redirected it to an education fund for children who grow up without support, which earned a small nod of understanding from Aunt Ruth. Then I shared the hardest truth of all. I had rewritten my will, and any inheritance they expected was no longer theirs, because I refused to let my sacrifices be erased or miscredited ever again. Mom collapsed onto the couch in shock, asking how I could do this after everything, and for the first time I said it plainly, that I had supported them for 15 years while they denied my efforts, praised Marcus, and never once showed gratitude. As I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door, no one stopped me, and it was Aunt Ruth who finally reached out, hugged me, and apologized for believing the lies, followed by Uncle Bob and others who admitted their regret and shame. One by one, relatives realized the truth was bigger than just money, including Aunt Carol, who confessed she had loaned Marcus a large sum based on the same false story. I made it clear I didn't want sides taken or apologies offered, only that the truth be acknowledged, and as I stepped into the cold night air and got into Daniel's waiting car, I felt something I hadn't known in years, a deep sense of relief and freedom. In the days that followed, messages poured in from relatives who finally understood, expressing regret for judging me without asking, while my parents remained silent, and for the first time, that silence felt like peace rather than punishment. The news spread faster than I expected, and soon even my mother's book club knew what had happened, her quiet embarrassment turning into open gossip, and to my surprise, I felt no guilt at all. On January 8th, Marcus finally texted me, asking if exposing everything had really been necessary and claiming our parents were devastated, and after staring at the message for a long moment, I replied that he had stayed silent and taken credit for 15 years, so he didn't get to lecture me now. My parents said nothing at all for days, not out of regret but because they were clearly regrouping, rewriting the story yet again, and when Daniel asked how I felt, I realized the best word was light. Like a burden I didn't know I carried had finally been set down. Near the end of January my father called, his voice stripped of confidence as he admitted they were struggling without the monthly money and asked for help, just temporarily, but I calmly said no and reminded him that the chapter was closed, even when he tried to guilt me by mentioning furniture being sold. I told him this wasn't cruelty or punishment, it was boundaries, and when he hung up I felt oddly at peace. Then in early February Aunt Ruth called, shaken and angry, revealing the truth about Marcus's hidden debts, tens of thousands on credit cards and a large sum borrowed from Aunt Carol under false pretenses, money that had never gone to any real investment. As she spoke, it became painfully clear that my support hadn't just sustained my parents, it had quietly funded Marcus's entire illusion for years. And in that moment, everything finally made sense. I finally understood what they had done, quietly building a fragile life on my money while pretending I didn't exist. And when I said it out loud, Aunt Ruth sadly agreed and apologized, reminding me that most people trust family because that's what decent people do. I found myself calm as I admitted that family should mean something, but sometimes the people you choose and who choose you back matter more than shared DNA. And when she asked if she could be part of that family, I told her she already was. A few days later, an unexpected email arrived from a woman named Patricia, who turned out to be my father's younger sister, someone I'd never known existed because she'd been pushed out decades ago for the same reasons I was. She shared her story of leaving, building a peaceful life, and learning that loyalty should never require self-destruction, and reading her words made it clear this pattern had been passed down for generations and was finally stopping with me. Then months later my mother emailed for the first time, asking to fix things, and leaning on vague regrets and family obligation, but not once truly owning the harm she caused. I replied honestly, explaining that a real relationship can't survive on guilt, excuses, or shared blood alone, and that without truth, accountability, and respect, there is nothing left to rebuild. That I ended my message by saying that if they ever wanted to truly try again, they knew how to reach me, but I was done waiting after 38 years, signed my name, hit send, closed my laptop, and went outside to clear my head. Now it's December 31st again, 1 full year since everything changed, and I'm sitting in the sunroom of our new home with 3 bedrooms, a yard, and space for the future we're building, paid for partly by the $24,000 I no longer sent away and the savings we finally got to keep. I recently visited Patricia in California, and we talked for hours about our shared family history, how these patterns repeat, and how much strength it takes to step away. And when she smiled at her happy family and asked if it looked like she regretted leaving, I had my answer. Aunt Ruth now calls me every Sunday and has become the steady presence I always needed. And while my parents are struggling and Marcus has moved back in, I don't feel joy or anger about it, just clarity, because I spent too many years giving everything and I can't live that way anymore. My parents never replied to my last message, and I've accepted that some doors close because the people behind them refuse to change. Tonight, as I sit on my porch watching the sunset and waiting for Daniel to come home, I know this year taught me that being a good daughter doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. Love isn't something you earn through sacrifice, and setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. I don't feel hate, only sadness for what never was, but I also gained peace, honesty, real family, and a life that finally feels like my own, and for the first time in my life that is more than enough.